Okay, so I'm Laurin, and I come from Germany. I was born and raised there, and I'm 24 right now, and I study international business. That's also why I'm here in China. I am currently on my exchange semester, so I already studied some Chinese in Germany as part of my international business course, and now I'm here studying I'm studying business administration. I'm excited about being here in China. So, to my story. I was born and raised in South Germany, and I have 3 younger siblings. So 2 brothers, 1 sister, and I grew up with all of them, and as well as my extended family, all living pretty close together. My family was really close growing up. Also my extended family, my grandparents, I spent a lot of time with them. So that was sort of my early childhood. My dad is a businessman, and so he works a lot. I was very used to him not being around a lot, or at least always working. I actually remember realizing in elementary school that other dads, they don't work on Saturdays. I thought it was pretty odd. Yeah, and I realized, oh, okay, maybe that's not normal. But so I also grew up going to church on Sundays, and then there was also some like youth events throughout the week, but pretty much that, going to church on Sundays, and me and my siblings all grew up in that setting, and that's pretty much, I think, what it was like for me until I was 10, 11 years old. I always went to church. I mean, I didn't always like it. I often was kind of like, do we really have to go to church? But I mean, you're a child, so it's not really a whole lot of options you have. So you simply go. And yeah, but then that started to change, as I said, a little bit when I was 11, I think. That's when it started, and I started getting a little more rebellious, and I actually think, which is hard to say now, but I do think I hit puberty a little bit earlier than most people in my age, especially boys my age, and so I got really rebellious, and I also did have a lot of just anger and those kind of things, and so I was like, I don't want to go to church anymore. It's like boring, and yeah, my relationship to my parents didn't really improve, but I started to fight a lot, especially with my dad. I think also had a lot to do with him not being around a lot, and me not feeling really understood. And then he also had some anger issues, and I definitely kind of responded in the same way and returned that anger. And so yeah, I stopped going to church, I think, when I was 12, and actually, like, also at that time I started because most people my age, they weren't really in puberty yet. They were not thinking of a lot of stupid stuff, but me and a few friends, we started like drinking alcohol and started smoking hookah, and started meeting with a lot of girls and hanging out with a lot of girls, and that actually started for me being sort of also a compensation, because growing up, especially in elementary school, I wasn't really the popular kid, so I was often kind of an outsider, and I was also a little overweight, and that kind of like all contributed to this image of me as a not feeling like the most popular kid. And then suddenly when I hit puberty, and at 12, I was always pretty tall, but then I also started growing a lot, so I did lose some weight, and that kind of, I guess, got me the attention from a little bit of the girls, or some of the girls, and that really gave me a boost in confidence, and that kind of became also a way of compensating for my other insecurities, hanging out with a lot of the cooler people and hanging out with the girls, and so that's what I did. And I think I had my first girlfriend when I was 13. Let me think. No, I think it was 13. Actually, it was 12. I think it was 12. And then I basically I started like going on parties, and I mean, fortunately, they weren't so bad yet, simply because I was so young, and people I spent time with were pretty young, so there were no like hard drugs around or anything like that. But yeah, we did do some stupid stuff, and so I started having a bunch of girlfriends, and kind of like broke up with one, and then immediately got into the next relationship. Then the second time already like got into a relationship with the next girl before I actually properly ended the last one, and then broke that up again. And I mean, they all didn't last for very long, just a couple of months always, but it was always pretty, I don't know, intense, and it was just, I guess, a way of compensating insecurities. And so when I was 14, actually, I've had 3 girlfriends at that point already, and I realized, okay, my life is a little bit of a mess. I was also really bad in school at that time. I was I was failing classes in school, English classes, which, yeah, and all the other classes. My parents were pretty concerned, I guess, and they realized also I was not doing well. They also didn't know how to handle me, because I'm the oldest child, so I was the first child to kind of hit that age and go there. And so, hold on. Yeah, so I realized that I was not really in a good place, and I wasn't making a lot of good decisions. And I knew, okay, like there must be some God out there, but I didn't really care, and thought that faith and God was nothing for me, or was, at least not in my position, was not helping me. And that's why I really compensated for a lot of my insecurities with other things. And so when I was 14, I had already done a bunch of stupid things, enough to realize if I continue like this, it's not gonna go very well with me, probably. Like I'm not gonna, it doesn't necessarily lead me into a direction that I want to be in life. I already realized when I was 14, and so I realized I need help. I think that was the big realization that I had when I was 14, is I need help. And so that's when, during the summers, I would also still sometimes go, for the first time in a couple of years, we would go to the summer camp together with my family, and they had a pretty cool youth program. And so they also one night invited people to rededicate their lives to God if they wanted to. And for me, I did that, and it wasn't really led by a lot of conviction. I wasn't like, oh, like I've been a sinner and I'm so bad and Jesus forgive me. It was more like, okay, Jesus, I need help. I think that was where it started. And looking back, that really was the start of my relationship to God, my own relationship to God. That wasn't led by my parents or a church environment, but it was actually my own relationship. And as much as it was just simply me saying I need help, God loved it, and He took it. And so that's when I also started going to church again, which was really uncomfortable for me. Actually, in the beginning, it was a lot like because now I had become the cool kid, and people at church were not cool, not at all. And so I was hanging out with all these cool people that were like, oh, what church, that's super stupid. And so in the beginning, I would literally pray to God, please don't let me see anyone with these church people. I was always, when we went out into the city and walked around in the city, I was always like, Jesus, please, I don't want to meet anyone, because I was so embarrassed of I guess that outward appearance, which was ridiculous now looking back, but that was the place that I was at the time. And so actually, as I said earlier, I had anger issues, and those were pretty severe, I guess, for that age. Like I would always yell at my parents. I would scream and shout, and it turned always into this shouting contest. Whoever shouted the loudest was the one who would win the argument, sort of. And I would always run off into my room and like bang the door, slam it. And I actually slammed it so hard one time that the door frame broke. So that, yeah, I guess it's still like the door frame still exists today, actually, still has, still broken. And it reminds me actually of where I come from, which is pretty funny because so after I sort of rededicated my life to God, which at the time it didn't feel like that big of a thing, but it really was the turnaround. I suddenly realized that this uncontrolled anger that I had, the uncontrolledness of it was gone. So I still had a lot of bitterness and anger in me, but it would come over me and I would start screaming and like banging doors, and that suddenly that was no longer there. I was angry, but I could contain it, I could control it. And so I think that actually was my first deliverance right there, where God really set me free from that uncontrolledness and that spirit of anger and rage. And so that was cool to see. And so I was really glad that suddenly I had this new freedom. And I also did have some very tangible experiences with God in that time. And for example, I was really afraid of spiders. I had a phobia, and so sometimes I would just lay in bed at night and I would just close my eyes and I would just see spiders, and it would freak me out so hard that I just couldn't sleep, and it was intense. And so and then I prayed and I realized, okay, God has given me authority. And so I just prayed and said, okay, God, I prayed and I said, God, would you take this away? I know that you can do it. And he did. And suddenly I realized, wow, okay, it's not like I suddenly loved spiders, not at all. But again, this feeling of I'm a victim of this no longer exists. And I realized, no, actually I can pray and it will go away. And those were the first real tangible experiences that I had with God and the power that he had. And so I had these really cool experiences with God where I realized, okay, he's so real and he really is there. And I would feel his presence when I would pray in my room, and so that really was this confirmation in my heart of, okay, God is real and he loves me and he wants to be in my life. And so that really started something in my heart where I opened up to God a lot more. And then by this lady. Yeah. And so by the end of the summer of 2014, I started to have contact again, as I said, to people in the church, and I went there sometimes. But I also got to know this girl, and we talked online, and we started meeting, and she wasn't a Christian at all or anything, but I didn't really think of that as a bad thing. I mean, as I said, like, it wasn't like this turnaround in my life. It was, I opened the door for God to come into my life, and I started dating her when I was 14, and it was, I don't know, November or something. But just basically a couple of months after that experience I had in the summer, and that relationship, started becoming really unhealthy pretty quick. Made a lot of really bad decisions in that relationship, and a lot of unhealthy physical closeness and everything that just wasn't healthy at all, especially in that context. And I mean, she also sort of gave her life to Jesus and kind of opened up to that. And we went to youth group together and did things like that. But then at the same time, we still did a lot of stuff where we just compromised a lot in our relationships and also as individuals. And we didn't really have people in our lives that mentored us. Well, okay, that's actually not true. We did. Okay. Yeah. No, so we did have people in our lives that would speak into our lives, but we would not really allow them to come so close. And she also was from a very broken home, and so I also took on a lot of responsibility in a sense of feeling like I needed to care for her, and that her well-being depended on me being there for her, and so that was a very unhealthy pattern very early in our relationship, and that just continued on. But in all of that, I really started growing in my relationship to God, and I also started being convicted of certain things. So one of the first things for me actually was I had all these illegally downloaded music, movies, software, all of that stuff, and I realized, oh, actually, I think that's not really honest. And I realized, oh, I need to delete those. And so that was, in the beginning, that already was a big step for me. I was like, ooh, this feels heavy, and I don't know, I don't want to do this, but realized, okay, no, this is the right thing. And so that was the first thing I did. I started deleting those things. And then another thing I realized, I always used to go to school by taking the train. It was just from the second to last stop to the last stop. And so no one would ever like check tickets. So I would just dodge the fare. That was what I did. I mean, every day. And I also started realizing, oh, maybe that's not the right thing to do either. And I started not taking the train, simply walking, or paying for it in some cases. But yeah, I stopped just dodging the fare. And so those were those little things where God really started to bring conviction to my life. And I couldn't get away from it, because I realized that God was good and he was there, and I wanted him to be in my life. And so I realized that would also mean that the Holy Spirit would live in me, and he would convict me of things that weren't right. And so that's one of those things that happened early on. Then, let me think. Double check. And so also my relationship to my parents got a lot better again, and I started working through forgiveness, and I started forgiving my parents and blaming them for bad things that happened to me, or just stuff that I had experienced. And that really started bringing freedom into my life. And I mean, I had already started watching pornography very early. I think also, I mean, that time of rebellion, like 12, 13, I started watching pornography, and that as well, I realized, okay, I need to stop that. And while that was always still a struggle, I started the fight, really. That was also very, very significant. And so I think when I think of that time, it was really me handing over one area of my life after the other over to God, and having him be the Lord of my life one step at a time. And then I realized when I was 16 that the last area that I was still holding on to, that I was still in control of, was the relationship to my girlfriend. And I realized, no, I need to let that one go as well. And that was really hard, because I also felt so trapped in that relationship, because I felt so responsible as well, that I wasn't sure if is God in this, is it not. And I started praying, God, would you do what you want to do, and would you have your way? And eventually I would start praying, God, if it's your will, help me break up. And that actually was kind of bold at the time for me. I was like, okay, this feels really scary, but God, if that is actually what you want, then would you help me do it? And then that's like another defining moment of my life, was my 17th birthday. And I had just been on the phone with my girlfriend at the time, and we were fighting, and I was just annoyed, and I was not in a good place. My parents knew that as well, and my mom would always say, like, you're not happy, like something, what's on? Don't you think you need to make some changes in your life? And she never pushed me to do anything, which I'm now thankful for. But yeah, looking back now, it was clear that she saw that it wasn't a healthy place for me to be in. And so what happened is we had been fighting, and I finished the phone call, and I started watching this worship video on YouTube. And it was just, I don't remember which band, I don't remember which song, but I remember that after the song there was this preacher, and he started sharing this Bible verse and what it meant. I literally don't even remember the Bible verse, but it spoke to me. I remember that, and it really opened my heart, and I started like tears running down my eyes. And that was already, back then, that was a really big deal for me, because I was so hard-hardened and I would never cry. And so that already to me is like, wow, tears in my eyes, that I'm moved. And then I just like watched that and finished watching that, and then did something else. And my mom knocked at my door and came in, and she brought me that birthday card from my church, from my church pastor. And while I really love my church, I don't think that birthday cards are necessarily their forte, and I always thought of it as really cheesy, and I don't know, I sometimes looked at it, but then I would just, put it away usually. But my mom gave it to me, and I was like, oh, cool, look, this is the verse that they got for you this year. And I always thought, oh, it's just pre-printed. They just take one, write my name, and it's not really like they think about it a lot. But I started reading the verse, and the video I'd watched was in English, and the card I was reading was in German. But still, I realized that that same verse that had just brought me to tears earlier was the one that was right in that card. And that just broke me. And it was such a little thing, really, but it was God speaking to me, I'm here, and I know you, and I'm in your life. And that gave me incredible confidence to know, okay, God is here. And on my birthday, on my 17th birthday, I actually decided to break up with my girlfriend, who had been dating for almost 2.5 years. So over 2 years, yeah. And I then broke up 6 days later, but I made the decision that day. And that I think it was another really defining moment in my life, because that for me marked the moment where I was no longer holding on, like actively holding on to any area in my life. And I realized, okay, God, I'm all in. For whatever that means, but I'm all in. And I still realize, okay, there's still stuff I need to figure out, but just deep down in my heart, there was this dedication of, no, with all my life, I'm gonna follow God. And so that next time in my life, so from 17 onwards, was really a time of incredible, I think, just awakening in my relationship to God. And I really felt the nearness of God and the comfort of God as well, and especially also in this time of having just broken up with my girlfriend and having to work for a lot of pain and loneliness and all these things. I just felt the comfort of God and the nearness of God so clearly in that time. And He healed me from so many, like, also emotional things, emotional just bondage as well from that relationship and other things. And so that really to me was awakening my relationship to God. And I realized it's not about something on the outside, but it's about that relationship that I have with God, just on the inside, me and God. And I would just often lay in bed at night. I would be listening to worship music, and just this incredible joy and peace would come over me. And that was just every night for night. I would just lay in my bed, and I would just laugh so hard and like smile so hard, because the joy was so real. And I couldn't explain it, but it was there and it was real. And that also actually was the time where it really started for me that my mind, that also had really been a hindrance in me understanding God, also I think sharing about God, had really been a roadblock there, because I would always, in my mind, I was always like, okay, I know God is real, but it doesn't make sense. That was always in my mind. And like, yes, God is real, but what about this? But what about that? And so that time I really started that peace that in the Bible also says there's the peace that transcends all understanding will guard our hearts and minds. And I think that really became tangible in that time of God covering me and my mind having that peace, even though stuff didn't make sense. I didn't care, and that was a really good sign for me. And then I also decided when I was 17 that I wanted to do some sort of Bible school, discipleship school, something like that, ministry school, after I graduated high school. And so I started looking for different programs and different things that I wanted to do. And I was looking into, for example, like Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry and a lot of other ministry schools and Bible schools around the world, really, because I wanted to get out. And also had heard from other people, from some of my friends, that there was this organization called YWAM, and they do these things called DTS. And so I looked at it and was like, well, but this is kind of like missions, and I don't really want to do that. Like, I don't want to go to some far away place. I just kind of like want to do some sort of ministry or Bible school, like literally like the part of like foreign countries, foreign cultures, especially also like being uncomfortable in a sense of maybe having to go to a poorer country or a country that's developing. And so I was like, not for me. That's not for me. And that kind of was my excuse. But I started realizing that God was putting that into my heart. And even though I always told myself, no, I'm not called to that. Like, I'm the one who's not called to missions. That's not my thing. And still God started moving in my heart. And so God just began moving in my heart about this DTS thing. And so I started looking into different discipleship training schools all over Europe, and I started also looking inside of Switzerland and Germany, because I realized my English actually was really bad. This is literally another part of God's power in my life, because I was the second worst student in my graduating class in English. I mean, I could not save a correct English sentence to save my life. There was no way. English was a big issue for me. And I would always tell myself, I can't speak English, languages are not my thing. I mean, that was what I always told myself all throughout high school. And because of that, I actually didn't learn French, and I didn't learn any other language. Now looking back, which is super sad, but that was always what I told myself. And so that was the reason why I said, okay, well, I want to work on my English, and I would rather maybe stay in Germany, where I do understand some of the stuff that is being spoken. And so I looked at bilingual programs in Germany, and somebody pointed out that there was a program in Herrnhut, East Germany. It's a very tiny town. I mean, East Germany, for someone who comes from South Germany like me, that's not really the part of Germany that you necessarily want to live in or go to. There's just nothing there. And I never had any desire really to go there. But I really started feeling, there's something to this, and I think I should do it. And so I decided to do it. And I actually also realized that in the process of making that decision, my grandfather told me that he was actually born in that town. And that my great-great-grandfather had been a Moravian missionary who had come out of that town, or the missions movement that he was a part of came out of that very, very town. And I realized, suddenly it seems like there's more to this. There's like a bigger narrative. There's a bigger story that's going on here. And it's not just, about me. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit, because I realized, like, missions, and like, I don't know, it's not what I wanted to do. But I signed up anyway, and so I went there, and it was a good time. I mean, it was a great experience, but it wasn't really that life-changing experience that I had hoped for. And that was because I kind of thought, well, I'm just going to go there, and it's going to be like, it's a Bible school, and everybody there is going to be so excited about faith and God, and that environment will literally, just by myself, I will turn into this great Christian that doesn't have any struggles anymore. And that kind of was the picture that I had somehow, which, obviously wasn't the case. Everybody there had issues, and I was hanging out with a lot of people that actually seemed to have more issues than I did, and I didn't really put a lot of effort into that time. And I realized coming out of it, wow, I had amazing experiences, but I'm not in the place that I wanted to be at. And that for me was where I feel like I can walk away. I can say, okay, I have this constant and stable relationship to God, where I don't feel like I'm always in a roller coaster of doing well and having a good time with God, and suddenly not doing well and feeling like God is so far away. I want to get away from this roller coaster experience. And so I decided to do another school for another 4 months. So the first one went for 6 months. The second one went for 4 months. And after 1 year, so the second school really did change me a lot. And I think that was really the experience I was looking for. And it was also because I changed a lot of things. Instead of going to bed super late and just getting up right before lecture, I started to go to bed early, and I got up at 6, and I went for a prayer walk before breakfast, and yeah, it made all the difference. And instead of hanging out with people, which me as an extrovert, that was always one of the most important things, I consciously made the decision to say, no, people are cool and they're important and they're here, and I will get to spend time with people, but my first priority is to spend time with God in this time. And so that's what I did, and it completely changed my life. And it was a great environment, just where people were absolutely going after God together, and that really changed my life. And that was actually also where, from saying, God, I'm all in, but on my terms, it started becoming, God, I'm all in, no matter what. And it was really a hard process, but I realized that God is so worthy of my life, and that even if He doesn't do another thing for me in my life again, and yeah, maybe even like a story like Job, which is obviously extraordinary, but even whatever happens, God is still worthy of my life, and He already did everything, and so He's already absolutely worthy that I would pursue Him with my entire life, and I would give everything that I have for Him to be glorified. And that was really, I guess, that season of my life, that from 18 to 19, that was what really changed in my life, was from going from, oh, this is great and I'm all in, to I'm all in no matter the cost. And that was really crucial, actually, because I was planning to go back to university afterwards, and that means the expectation in Germany from my family, from my friends, everybody expected me, oh yeah, you're going to go to university, that makes sense, it doesn't make sense for you to do anything else, and you've already not wasted 1 year of your life, but it's okay to take a gap year. A lot of people do that, but now it's time to get serious. And so I started interning with an architecture company because I wanted to study architecture. But in that process, I realized, oh, this is cool, this is fun, but I don't think I want to work as an architect, and I don't feel like God is pulling me here. This is not really the thing. And so it took me a while to actually start thinking about, wow, God, would you actually want me to go back? Because that literally was outside of anything that I had seen as a possibility for me so far in my life. I would always say, no, like, I'm going to go study and have a normal job. That's where I see myself, and not in any sort of full-time ministry or anything like that. And so I had never considered it. And for me, it was a big thing to start considering, wow, God, would you actually speak into this idea of going back to that organization? And it was also, not only for me, it was a big deal, but it was also a big deal for my parents and my family and my friends, because that would mean I would not follow that normal path of what people expect. And so in the beginning, that was we're like, okay, you're only going to do 1 year and maybe 1.5. But yeah, so I was like, okay, well, that's what I start with. And they asked for a commitment of 2 years. I was like, well, maybe 1.5, but probably 2. Yeah, we'll be fine. So I just said, yes, I'll do it. And I returned to that organization. And in that process, I realized, actually, God really asked me to surrender everything. Because even though earlier I had said, oh, I'm all in, I realized there was still stuff that I was holding on to. And I was like, yes, I'm all in, but I don't want to go to, like, for example, India, or I don't want to go to these really poor places where life is hard and people have not as easy of a time as I do in a Western country, in Germany. And so I realized that comfort actually was still an idol in my life. And I think that also had to do with the upbringing that I was in, that comfort was always valued as something really important. And that this idea of sacrificing something or just going hard after something, even if it hurts, that was nothing I really embraced in my life, because I was always like, nah, I just want to be comfortable. Why should I do something to be uncomfortable? That doesn't make any sense. And so that's something that really started out. And so, as I said, I returned to that organization, and I started becoming a staff in those schools. And that would also mean that I would lead outreaches. And the first outreach location that I was sent to was South Africa and Botswana. And that was already for me like, oh wow, that's a big deal. And I went there, and it was completely fine. I honestly, before that, I was a little concerned, but then I went there, I'm like, oh, this is fine, I can do this. And then the next location that I was sent to was Bangladesh. And when I first heard that, I was like, okay, this is intense. And I started reading about the country. I'm like, wow, this is outside of my comfort zone, very much. But I trusted God that He knew what He was doing. And I went there, and I realized, again, I can do this. Actually, I mean, physical discomfort or whatever, it's not that big of a deal. I can do it. And that really took a lot of my fear away of being uncomfortable in life. And realizing that if God had placed me there or would want me there, that would be the best place that I could be in. That would be the best place, the safest place, and the most fulfilling place that I could see in or be in my life, if that's where God would want me. And that realization really gave me a lot of joy and freedom, suddenly to actually dream and say, God, well, if you want me to go somewhere that I'm not really comfortable with, or that I've always thought is not a place for me, I can do it. If you want me to, I can do it. And I realized that would also mean that I could work in areas that I didn't consider so far, that I could do all of these things. And I think that, again, was for me a lot of freedom. And in that time, I also learned a lot about culture and what it meant to live in community with other Christians. And it was a really good time where I grew a lot. And I also, obviously, I had to start lead things. And leadership suddenly also was really something that God motivated me to and gave me perspective on. I realized, no, it actually is a joy to be a leader, because that means I get to serve people. And I mean, the model of leadership that Jesus showed us, it's really serving people ultimately. I mean, and that was also always this idea of serving someone. That was always like, I don't know, I want to lead stuff, you know. And so this understanding of leadership that I had really shifted, and it was amazing to see how suddenly I realized that was the greatest joy and privilege that I could have in my life, of leading things, which would mean that I would serve everyone. And and so I had been with this organization for 2 years, and I started thinking, okay, maybe I should. I thought, okay, I might be with this organization forever. But I suddenly started realizing, oh, maybe there is something else. And I always kind of had this idea of, I will probably study at some point. I will do some sort of professional career. But I thought it was going to be far in the future. And I realized, oh, maybe actually this might be a lot closer than what I thought so far. And God started really moving in my heart, and I started thinking about what could I study, and by the end of the last school that I was a part of as staff, I was at a point where I realized, no, I think I actually want to study international business. And as I said earlier, studying something international was never a consideration for me because my English was so poor. But actually in these in total, it was 4 years that I was with this organization, minus half the year that I spent in the architecture internship. But in these 4 years, my English had actually become really, really good. And I was also a translator for that organization, and I would constantly be up front in front of groups, translating and interpreting. And I realized, wow, my English has improved incredibly, and I am able to study in English, no problem actually. And that was amazing, because I had never seen that as a possibility of studying internationally something in English. And because of that time there, I actually was able to do that. So I really do think that God placed me in that organization also to learn English, and that was really part of why I was there. But the other part was that He really gave me a heart for the nations, and He gave me a heart for not only my own country, but other countries as well. And suddenly that became a whole different world open to me, because as I said, I never thought about doing something internationally. I always thought, oh, international, that's scary. Most of the countries are poorer than Germany in this world, so international, I don't think this is something for me. But God really changed that and took this idea of I cannot, or I'm not capable of. He took that away and replaced it with, well, if I do want you to, you can do anything. And another really important thing in that time was not buying to the expectation of other people. And that also included my parents, which was not easy, because I really do respect my parents and I know they want the best for me. But as I said earlier, when I returned to that organization, that was a big deal. But then also staying with that organization for so long was another thing. And a lot of the people around me, they kept telling me like, hey, you need to come back and you need to study. You're wasting time. Like, this is not going to get you anywhere. What you're going to write into your CV? Are you going to tell them like you spent 4 years doing like volunteering something? And a lot of people always made it sound like it was a really poor decision to do that in terms of career or professional life. But I still knew, okay, God, this is what you have for me, and so this is what I do. And I know that you are faithful and that you will work it out in the end. And so after 4 years, I then started studying international business, and I started studying in South Germany, in this place where I also could learn Chinese, which is actually pretty rare in Germany still. But I took that opportunity and started learning Chinese, which was really, really cool. And in high school, I wasn't the best of students. I mean, I guess God gave me a brain and I can survive in high school, but I was always really lazy, which I think honestly working hard is the biggest part of any accomplishment, and I was not that good of a student, so yeah, not really extraordinary in any way, really. And so I didn't really have that big of expectations for my studies. And as well, obviously my grandparents and my parents, they all knew, well, he has been out of school for 4 years and it's not necessarily been easy in high school, so he's probably going to struggle really hard in the beginning. And that was kind of the expectation that I was going in with. I mean, I did also believe God will carry me through, but I thought it was going to be a rough patch in the beginning. And it actually turned out that it wasn't at all. But I had incredible grace to simply study and to do well in university. And that not only meant in terms of grades and stuff, but I had so much favor everywhere. And that really spoke to me about, if God wants you to do something, he's going to open the door for you. And I also received a scholarship, a really good one actually, and that was never something that I could ever have imagined. I mean, people that know me from high school, when they hear about it, or they was like, how? You were not the guy to receive a scholarship. This is not really happening. And it's amazing because it shows me the goodness of God. And I honestly don't know how I'm doing so well in university. It's the grace of God. And it's very hard to explain to someone that doesn't have this understanding of the supernatural power of God, which also includes having favor with people and grace to do something. So I always tell people, no, like, this is not me, guys, really, you need to believe me, this is not me. I'm not the guy who's good in school, but I am in university, and it's really, really amazing to see how also in that God is faithful. And even though I have been out of school for 4 years and it should be hard, it really hasn't been. And I love that. And the other thing was, and another part was also that God really pointed me to that specific program in South Germany, because it already includes, it's very oriented on practical work, and it also includes a semester abroad and an internship abroad. And that meant that I only have to be in Germany for 2 years, and I get to be abroad for another 1 year already in my bachelor's. And that was something that I really, really missed in the beginning. So not being traveling, not being in the nations, that really was something I missed incredibly in the beginning. But also seeing God being faithful in that, and bringing me to places where He also can fulfill the desires of my heart. And that really is, I think, just seeing now, looking back at my life and seeing the narrative of God, the story that God is writing in my life, and seeing that, it makes me so happy to see, because I think so much of my life so far, of my story with God so far, has been really shaped by this idea of, I think it's impossible, but then God makes it possible. Or I'm not capable of something, well, God still gives me grace to do it. And not necessarily just somehow make it, but actually do it well. And that's English, for example, but that's also now my business studies. And I'm really, really overwhelmed by how faithful God actually is. And as I just said, like, I'm so happy and so excited to be in the place that I'm at. And that also really speaks to how God can change our hearts. And He loves to place things in our hearts that He can fulfill. And that, so for example, that for me is now studying international business in this context. But when you think back of when I graduated high school, I didn't want to do that. And so sometimes also surrendering to God means that He will change the desires of your heart. But in order for Him to do that, you need to allow Him to do that. And so that I think really is what my life has been about so far. So if you are in a place right now where you're wondering whether or not it is really worth giving everything for Jesus, then I can absolutely assure you it is 100%. Not only did He create you and He loves you and He gave His life for you, but He has created a life for you, and He wants you to live your fullest and your best life. And so I just want to encourage you that whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're holding back, just give it to God and it will be better. Like, there's no way that God would touch something and it would turn worse. And He didn't say it will always be easier, but I can tell you from my life, it will be so much better. And He turns broken things into beautiful things. And so I also want to encourage you with a verse where if you are worried or anxious about stuff, there's this promise in the Bible, and it's in Philippians 4 verses 6 and 7. And it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." And here comes the promise, verse 7. "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And that's something I've experienced so tangibly in my own life, that even though it doesn't make sense, even though stuff is difficult and it hurts, if we really give it all to Him, He gives us this peace and joy that transcends all understanding. Even in the hardest and toughest situation, He is there, and the Holy Spirit in you is near, and He gives you this peace and this joy. And that is what I have for you.